Hi everyone, so today I'll be doing a video on the iPhone 12 versus the S20FE. Please try to ignore any noises in the background, whether it's banging or dogs barking, because I can't control them. My dad's building a thing in the garden and the dogs are just... she won't stop barking, so I just can't control it. So please try to ignore them. Before we start, and Samsung users start saying it's an unfair comparison because the S20FE is cheaper, it's a fair comparison. I have the 4G version with the Exynos 990, but the more expensive version has 5G and it's the Snapdragon 865, which is closer in price to the iPhone 12. So yeah, it's a fair comparison. Everything's the same except for 5G and that chip. So I'll put the prices of these devices on screen here, and the video is going to be long enough, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. So with that done, let's get into it. Let's just get the controversial topic out of the way and just say that the iPhone doesn't come with a plug, and this includes every iPhone from the SE right up to the 12 Pro Max. And it isn't really that big of a deal since you most likely have a plug and most likely a wire as well from last year's phone that you have. Like, you're not charging your phone with air. I won't go into more detail about that because it would be way too long, as this video is already long enough, and I will make a whole separate video on that, which you should watch out for. So, design. Off the bat, I like the design of both of these phones. I love the iPhone 12's design. The flat minimalistic square design looks amazing. And the S20FE has a nice minimalistic design as well, with those curved edges and a huge camera bump. Now I mean in terms of thickness, not in terms of overall size. But unexpectedly, I like that camera bump. It actually gives a nice contrast to the design of the phone, with its size and the fact that it's black on top of the red. Whereas the iPhone matches the lens colour with the back of the phone, and the lens isn't as big, therefore not as much contrast. Even though the iPhone looks better, the S20FE is more comfortable to hold in your hand because of the curved design, since that is the natural shape of a human's hand. But Apple did try to combat this by curving off the edges of the square design, which does make it more comfortable, but not as comfortable as the S20FE. As we are talking about how comfortable it is to hold a device in your hand, let's talk about the display sizes. Both of these devices have a screen size of over 6 inches, unless you get the iPhone 12 mini, which is 5.4 inches. The iPhone 12 has a 6.1 inch display and the S20FE has a much bigger 6.5 inch display respectively. The first thing I noticed is that both of these devices were uncomfortable for me to type on, the iPhone being too small and the S20FE being a bit too skinny for my hands. My personal phone is an 11 Pro Max, I have it right here. It's wider than the Samsung and it's bigger than the iPhone 12, which makes it more comfortable for me to use with my big boy hands. So if you have big hands, just keep that in mind. But for most people, it should be fine. As always with iPhones, and as of the past few years with Samsung phones, the build quality is top notch, no pun intended, on both devices. The iPhone feels like a higher end phone compared to the S20FE. With the iPhone's glass panel and aluminium antenna sandwich build, it doesn't just make the phone feel premium, it also makes it reminiscent of the iPhone 5. Therefore, it makes it feel more familiar as well, especially if you're an iPhone user. Whereas the S20FE has a glassy back, which is a mix of plastic and glass, but to be honest, it feels kind of like plastic and it does feel a bit cheap compared to the iPhone. But you will see that Samsung put the money into other parts of this phone, which I'll talk about later. The one thing I will say I prefer about the S20FE's design though is the red colour, because the iPhone's red is more like a pinky red on the glass and is a deeper red on the antenna surrounding the phone. But the S20FE has a much nicer deep red all round and I'm much more fond of that. Performance. So the A14 chip in the iPhone will handle any task you throw at it with ease, as will the Exynos 990 and Snapdragon 865 in the S20FE. Although I did notice while using the S20FE that I came across a couple of stutters while scrolling or loading apps, and sometimes it took a hot second for it to switch between rotations of the screen, but all around it should be fine. I don't know what the performance would have been on the Snapdragon chip, since that's not the one I have the one with the Exynos. But overall, you shouldn't notice the difference between these two devices, between opening apps and scrolling through Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. it's not going to be a huge difference. One thing to note though is that the iPhone will get 5 to 6 years of software updates compared to the S20FE, which will only get 3. Now, moving on to display. The display you will notice on a day-to-day basis. Samsung definitely put a lot of money into their display and it shines. Like, it's really noticeable. The display is gorgeous with popping colours, sharp detail and is crystal clear. But they didn't stop there. It also has a camera hole instead of a notch, if you care about that. And it also has an in-display fingerprint reader, which in today's world is much more usable with masks than Face ID. And it also finally has a 120Hz refresh rate, which the iPhone doesn't have. Which means it should be smoother than the iPhone, but I didn't really notice much of a difference between the iPhone and the Samsung. I have a feeling that it may be to do with the way Samsung does, or Android in general, does their animations. iOS's animations is just much smoother, so instead of being smoother than the iPhone, 120Hz made the Samsung as smooth as the iPhone. But that could just be me, I don't know. Though I do sometimes think that the screen on the Samsung may make videos and photos look a bit oversaturated at times, so much that it's a bit unnatural, but at the same time the iPhones can look a bit less saturated and sometimes a bit boring, so it's up to you what you prefer in your display. Battery. So the battery is fine on both phones. Both last me a full day with either between 11% to 30% battery left at the end of the day, and that's with 100% brightness all of the time. Though the S20FE has a bigger battery. The 120Hz on the S20FE drains a lot of battery. Even though it has slightly longer battery life than the iPhone, it's not much of a difference. If you want to make a big difference, you turn off 120Hz and there'll be a big difference in battery life between the S20FE and the iPhone. But either way, both phones will get you through a day, no problem. Cameras. The cameras are a different story. The iPhone 12 has a regular wide camera and an ultra wide camera that are both 12 megapixels, but no telephoto. But it also has Dolby Vision HDR video and 4K at 30 frames per second with 10-bit color, which the S20FE doesn't have. But both devices can record at regular 4K at 60 frames per second, which is good. Just as an added bonus, the iPhone also has night mode and the selfie and ultra wide cameras, but let's just say it's not that great compared to the main cameras. It's actually nowhere near as good as the main ones, so it's probably not that much of a advantage, to be honest, really. Whereas the S20FE doesn't have any of this, but it does have a telephoto camera, which, like I already said, the iPhone doesn't have. But if you look at this video I took walking around, both devices did great with preventing shakes and wobbles in the video. Both of their stabilization systems are doing an amazing job. But the S20FE seems to make the colours a bit unnaturally saturated, which also tends to make the flowers look a bit less detailed, while the iPhone manages to make the colours pop while also being as natural as possible without blowing out the flowers. This is the new Dolby Vision at play. You will also notice this doing a much better job at exposing the sun in this video than the S20FE. You can see how the S20FE blows out the sun more. It's a bigger white ball on the S20FE. But the iPhone falls a bit when trying to focus on close-up subjects. It seemed to hunt a little when I got close to the cucumber, whereas the S20FE didn't. With photos, the S20FE again oversaturates the photos to the point that it looks unnatural. It is pleasing to look at those colours popping off the screen. It's nice to look at, but I prefer the more natural looking colours of the iPhone. They just look better. If you look at this photo of these orange flowers, again the flowers, the S20FE oversaturated the orange and yellow colours in the flower to the point that it kind of blew out the orange and took over, even though even the shadows are too bright. They don't really look like shadows. But when you look at the iPhone's picture, the flowers look closer to real life. The flowers actually look orange and yellow. The yellow tones in the middle of the flower gradually fade out naturally into the orange colour of the flower, keeping most of the detail, and the shadows actually look like, well, shadows. One thing to note with both phones is that they both gave a portrait mode like shot in the regular photo shooting mode, which I've noticed a lot with pictures with both of these phones. They tend to give portrait mode like photos. The iPhone started that non-portrait mode blur at the flower, whereas the S20FE did it further back at the leaves. So at first glance, the iPhone's picture looks better, but I much prefer the positioning of the bokeh effects the S20FE did. The S20FE also managed to cut out the flower better. It didn't blur the wrong parts of the photo. It managed to keep the flower completely sharp, which is also evident in the foreground, where the iPhone also makes this leaf at the front go out of focus, losing a lot of detail. Whereas the S20FE keeps it in focus, which results in better detail and a more balanced photo in terms of bokeh. But when you compare it to this picture I have of the tomatoes, again you can see the oversaturated colours with the S20FE, but when you zoom in, you can see around the edges of the tomato on the S20FE for some reason are a bit pixelated compared to the iPhone. And again you can see the not as saturated colours on the iPhone, which I honestly do prefer because again it looks closer to real life. But some people might prefer the oversaturated colours because they do look really nice, they're really pleasing to look at. But in my opinion, I'd prefer them to be closer to real life as possible. But one part the S20FE has over the iPhone is zoom. It has a 30 times super zoom, which doesn't really have brilliant quality anyway, and hardly anyone will use it. But more importantly, it has a telephoto lens with 3 times zoom, which is missing on the iPhone. Having a telephoto lens results in sharper images when you zoom into something, like for example this picture of grass I took. The S20FE's shot is a lot clearer and sharper because of that telephoto lens, whereas the iPhone's is good but not as good because the zoom on the iPhone 12 is cropping in using software rather than using a physical zoom lens and physically getting closer to the subject. Overall, unless you need the telephoto lens and like the S20FE's saturated colours, which you can do on the iPhone with a filter, the iPhone's camera is the best overall camera, especially if you are looking to take videos. The iPhone's camera is better, hands down. And here are some extra things that I just decided to mention. So both devices support 5G. The S20FE comes in 4G and 5G. The iPhone supports 5G as well. So my plan currently does not use 5G, and where I live I can barely get a good connection for 3G and 4Gs anyways. So my testing wouldn't have done much good for 5G, but if you look at photos and videos floating around the internet, 5G is not great at the moment. Like if you have to be right beside this tower, and if you're like here, you get full gigabit, go like this, you're suddenly down to 40 megabits. The coverage on 5G is pure shite. I wouldn't buy a phone because of 5G. Do not buy either of these phones, or any other phone for that matter, just because they have 5G. 5G is more of a future-proofing spec rather than a actual spec you'll use. It's something carriers will use to sell you more plans and spend more money monthly. Right now, it's not really the best. So don't waste your money on 5G. Just don't fall into the 5G trap. Both devices support the standard 7.5 watt wireless Qi charging, but they both also have their own proprietary charging. The S20FE supports the 25 watt fast charging Samsung provides, and the iPhone has MagSafe, which gives the iPhone 15 watt fast charging. But I'll talk more about MagSafe in a future video. So, which phone is better? I would have to say it is hard to choose. While the iPhone doesn't have a 120Hz display or a telephoto lens, the iPhone has better build quality, better overall cameras, especially for video, feels more premium and gets 5 to 6 years of updates, which you would want on a phone expensive as the iPhone. Well, the iPhone is expensive in Ireland anyway, like it has quite a hefty price tag compared to the S20FE. But if you get the iPhone 12 mini and the S20FE 5G to make them more evenly spec'd out, you will be paying less of a difference between the S20FE and the iPhone 12 mini than you would with the regular 12. Either way, the iPhone's more expensive and it does cost quite a lot here in Ireland. Whereas the S20FE has a 120Hz display, a telephoto lens in the camera, a bigger battery, a display that gives off colours that just pop gloriously, a more satisfying red colour, no notch, and an in-display fingerprint reader, which again in today's world of wearing masks is much better than Face ID. So that's it for today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, comment down below which phone you'll be getting and why. And don't forget to check out my socials, which will be here on the screen and linked down below in the description. And check out this podcast I do with my friend Connor. It's called PocketCast. The links for it are down below. It's on nearly any platform you can imagine: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, and more. Again, all the links down below. Check that out. And thank you for watching. Ciao tutti!